Hello, and welcome back to Mend Your Mind. I'm Jennifer Bellingrot, and I'm a licensed clinical psychologist in Arizona. And I'm with you today to talk about saying no. So, we've previously talked about perception, and we've talked about boundaries, and now we're going to talk about exactly how to set those boundaries because that is the hard part. So, I've got some notes here. We've got a lot of ground to cover, and I'm going to try to keep us organized and make it so that you can take notes if you'd like to. So, basically, what we're starting with is the idea of boundaries and why we have them. So, boundaries are a necessary part of a good and balanced life. So, having those limits in your life, saying yes, saying no, being able to choose and discern, those are important skills to have. So, saying no is actually one form of setting a boundary. And it's very important for us to remember that even as we have the right to say yes, we also have an inalienable right to say no. And that is important sometimes so that we don't overdo it or get ourselves involved in too many things and then watch other things like self care really suffer. So, over the years, I've seen countless patients struggle with saying no. They are generally women. Men struggle too, very often in the area of career. And a lot of times, women are bound by cultural or societal role expectations. So, some of the things that they will say to themselves are these: I feel selfish if I say no. So they've been raised that you should do whatever you can, and it's selfish if you say no. Well, I'd want someone to help me out if the tables were turned. Okay, fair enough. We'd want help from someone else, but we can't do everything. If I don't do XYZ, this or that thing, who will? Who's going to take care of it? If I say no, I feel like I'm being disrespectful or rude. Women are supposed to be nurturers and caregivers, so I need to do XYZ, this or that thing. And if I say no, I feel guilty. Well, to all of that, I say poppycock because we really have to view the way we look at setting boundaries, including saying no sometimes. So, why do we feel compelled to say yes when no is a perfectly good and valid answer or a reasonable response? Well, many people feel that saying no is selfish, and there are times where that could be true, but generally saying no is self preserving and not selfish. So, it helps you make sure that you take care of yourself. Some people say yes out of guilt. So if I can help, well then certainly I should. Just because you can say yes doesn't mean that you always should. Other people say yes out of a sense of gratitude. I'm so blessed in my life, I feel like I should give back, and I should do that as often as possible. Some people will say yes due to self esteem issues that they have that are related to how other people might see them. And they're worried that saying no makes them seem rude or disrespectful, unhelpful, asocial, unavailable, you name it. I've heard all of the descriptors. Others will say yes out of fear. So they're afraid that saying no will result in abandonment. So if I say no now, then no one's going to be able to help me, be available to help me down the road. Some say yes because they believe in the golden rule. So do unto others as you would have done to you. The golden rule is a beautiful principle to follow, especially in this culture of entitlement that we live in. But it isn't always the answer. And still others say yes out of a fear of karma. So they believe that what goes around comes around, and they better go around doing as much good as possible to stay out of trouble themselves. So you might be thinking at this point, well, what if I want to do it all? What if I want to save the world? Why do I need boundaries? Why do I need to say no sometimes? We're looking at three reasons. So one of them is to make space for yes in other areas. Number two is to take care of yourself. And number three is to not lose it. So we want to make space for yes in other areas by saying no. We want to take care of ourselves. No one's going to do that for us. And we want to do that. We want to say no so that we don't lose it when we become overwhelmed. So let's look at each of those in turn. The first one, to make space for yes in other areas. This involves taking a look at your priorities. what is most important to you in your life. And if you set boundaries and say no to things, then you'll have more time to focus on those, on saying yes to those priorities. So it's really about taking a look at what are your biggest priorities in life. The second one of taking care of yourself. So when people always say yes, I call this chronic yes syndrome, or CYS. And that leads quite simply to burnout and exhaustion, again, because we can't do it all. So if you have CYS, there is hope, and you can convert that to care for yourself, which is another CYS, by saying no to make room for important self-care efforts. And we're going to talk about the specifics of self-care in just a bit. The third reason is to not lose it. So over time, people who don't say no will become overwhelmed and frustrated. They get angry, they'll become resentful, the resentfulness turns into bitterness, and we have big problems. So when they reach their limit, they may lash out or go off on people because they have such low frustration tolerance at that point. So they've done these things for ever and ever, really struggle to say no, and then they finally just have it up to here, and they will lash out or go off on people where the reaction seems disproportionate to the situation at hand. And if you want to read more about that, you can read my blog on codependency that talks about how we get into those kinds of positions. So how do we discern exactly when to say no? Well, one helpful method is to do an inventory of your schedule or your life and ensure that you have time each week for self-care. So people define self-care very differently. We all have different likes and interests and different tastes. So this could be getting a facial or a massage, simply reading a book or taking a nap or resting, having coffee by yourself, just relaxing and watching a movie with your spouse or a friend, spending stress and drama-free time with your friends, and so on. So there are lots of different ways. It just depends on what floats your boat. So if you don't have self-care time at least once a week, and preferably more than just once in a 7-day period, you need to find opportunities to say no in your life. So let that be an indication to you that your boundaries are off, your priorities are out of whack, and it's time for you to find some places to say no. And remember, if you don't take care of you, no one is going to do it for you. And if you already have too much on your plate, you've already said yes too many times, then you can work at delegating those things, or at least not accepting new tasks or chores when your current ones are complete, and not until you have that weekly self-care up and running. Another method of discerning when to say no is to ask yourself, what would I say to a friend in this situation? So often we're more inclined to give credit to friends and other people than we are to ourselves. And we tend to be kinder to friends and other people. We are our own worst critics, so that's the idea to bear in mind here that gets us in trouble. So I've coined the term reverse narcissism to explain this phenomenon in the context of saying no. So briefly, narcissists are also known as egomaniacs. They're the people who think that they are God's gift to the universe, they're all that in a bag of chips, they can only hang out with other wonderful people, and so on. In situations of reverse narcissism, people actually underestimate themselves. So narcissism is about overestimating yourself and your value and your importance to other people in the world. Reverse narcissism, people are actually underestimating themselves and their rights, and they feel like they have to say yes to be everything to everybody all the time. So to be all of that in a bag of chips. But the last thing they are trying to be actually is narcissistic. They're trying to be very humble, very modest, always saying yes. But what they don't realize is that they're putting themselves on a pedestal and putting themselves in a position where they have to do all and be all, be everything to everyone. So here's the good news. No one person is that special or important. And if you want to read more about that, I wrote a blog on dispensability that you might enjoy checking out. A third method of discerning when a no is appropriate is to check whether saying yes is in line with those priorities that you've established for your life. Start by making a list of those life priorities. What is it that's most important to you? What drives you? What makes you happy? What brings you joy? For example, your list items might include these things: faith, partnership, parenting, provision, self, and friends. And a quick sidebar: if self is not on your list anywhere, then you need a different list. That's your first mistake. You've got to include taking care of yourself. Let your yeses honor those highest priorities. So the things that you say yes to should be in line with your highest priorities. And as I said earlier, make sure you leave room for that weekly self-care, at least once a week, something that you can do for yourself, preferably more often. And when you run out of adequate space in your schedule to honor those priorities, you start saying no. So you take a look at your priorities, look and see where you're spending your time, and is that in line with the things that are most important to you, or the things that bring happiness and joy to your life. So let's take a look at exactly how we should say no. The ways that we say no are as many as the situations that require it. But I'm going to give you 3 pointers, kind of overarching principles to remember. 1, you want it to be as soon as possible after you're asked. 2, it should be firm yet compassionate. That's how you should say no, firmly yet compassionately. And 3, I want you to be able to say no without guilt. So we'll look at each of those in turn. The first one is saying no as soon as possible. So if your plate is full, don't say maybe or, let me think about that a little bit and I'll get back to you. Just say no right away. Then you don't have to worry about it. Because if you don't, then you're going to be anxious and angsty and worrying about, when you're going to say no. You know that you have to come back to the issue in the future because someone has asked you something and you're not going to leave them hanging. You want to give them an answer. By that time, you've worked yourself into such a guilt state that you're going to say yes, and now you've lost sight of your priorities and your need for boundaries. And you don't want to look like a flake by not returning to the issue, so just get it over and done with right away as soon as you're asked and you know that your plate is already full. The second one is firmly yet compassionately. So this is a good rule when you're looking at saying no to your children or adults in your life. The idea is don't be wishy-washy. You don't want to hem and haw or say, well, I don't know. Again, let me think about it, maybe. Simply say something very firm that's also compassionate. So it's kind, but it's also firm, meaning you're setting your boundary and there are no questions about how you feel or what you're going to do or not do in response to the request. So some ways that you can say that are just simply no, thank you. Thank you for thinking of me, but I will pass. I appreciate the opportunity, but my plate is full. So that's that recognition that you already have too much going on. I would love to help. Now, only say that if it's actually true, because if it's not true and you say no this time, the person could potentially come back to you later and ask you to help again. And if you're not really interested, then you're going to look like a flake. So I would love to help, but I have no room in my schedule. Or thank you for the offer, but I'm not available for that right now. So I'm saying thank you, I'm expressing gratitude, I'm acknowledging that you've asked something of me, but I'm also firmly saying no, I'm not available. There's no maybe, no let me think about it, no possibly, I don't know. It's very direct, but also compassionate or kind, not rude or disrespectful. The third way to say no is without guilt. You have to get to a place where you understand the need to take care of yourself and the fact that you just can't do it all. Just very simply, we cannot be everything to everyone all the time. So it's preposterous to think, actually, that you can be everything to everyone. Nobody can do that. No one's perfect. If guilt does creep in, you have to come up with some sort of mantra or some sort of phrase that you say to yourself to combat the guilt. Here are some examples. So you can tell yourself, I have a right to say no, just like everyone else. I'm only one person. I can't do it all. I do plenty as it is. My plate is full. I'm not the only person on the planet who can do X, Y, Z, this or that thing. Someone else can do it this time. I'm taking care of myself. Self-care is important, and no one is going to do it for me. And I'm not going to be able to give or help or be available to people if I'm no good to myself. And I would have told a friend no in the same situation. So think about that idea that, we're kinder or easier on our friends than we are on ourselves. And tell yourself, well, I would have told a friend no, and I would have him or her not feel guilty about that. Or my personal favorite mantra that you can have is simply poppycock. It's just unreasonable. There's just no way that I'm going to do all of these things that people are asking me to do. So it's important to remember that getting no, or saying no rather, gets easier as you go along. Trust me in this. It gets easier. You get more confident. Just like learning to play a musical instrument, you're going to get better with practice. And just remember, you have the right to say no just as much as you have the right to say yes. And you have the right to say no just as much as the next person, like a friend whom you would encourage to say no in a given situation. Also, remember, you just can't be everything to everyone. So, my encouragement to you is to get out there and start saying no. Find areas where you can say no. Make sure that your yeses are in line with those priorities. Make your no's firm and swift right at the time, but also compassionate. And if you'd like to read more about the idea of boundaries, you can check out my blogs on the subject. And you can also watch the YouTube videos that I've posted on boundaries and perception. And perception is what it is that leads to those boundaries. So thank you all for joining me today. Stay tuned for the next video in the series, and God bless.